There's a star that lights the road. I'll take this ride and just drive. I wanna be the only one to make it to the light. Take it to the end. Maybe I could be the one right to the setting sun tonight. And just drive.
He was taken to a hill climb near his home in Salzburg by his grandma when he was about 9. His parents apparently didn't have any interest in motor racing, but the grandma did, and I think that's what sparked it. And then a couple of years after that, they opened a circuit at the Salzburg Ring, basically just down the road from his house, and he started to go and see races, and this passion developed. When he started, he was working for other people. He worked at a racing school at the Salzburg Ring. He was very lucky because in his little village there's a guy called Walter Lechner, who was one of the big names of Austrian motorsport. And Roland just wandered in one day and basically talked his way into a job as a mechanic. And just after that, Lechner opened the racing school, so Roland worked on the school cars, and every now and again he was allowed to drive around, and he basically taught himself to be a racing driver. And for 2 or 3 years he was working for different teams, working on cars for rich guys, but he knew he was better than them, and it was so frustrating for him. And finally he got the breaks.
I actually met him in 1985 when he arrived in England from Austria. I think he'd been doing Formula Ford over there and decided to do a full season of Formula Ford in England. And it was something that we were covering. And what we used to do in those days, we always used to go to the first test at Silverstone, hopefully, and go down and introduce myself to all the new drivers and get their portraits. And that's how I met Roland.
He'd been one of the leading runners in '86 all through that season. He'd won an event at Brands already called the Race of Champions, which was with 25 identical cars, and he beat some guys that went on to race in Formula 1 and Indy cars. But the festival was the big event, and everything had been building up to that. And his confidence had been building with the results he'd been getting. But a couple of days before the race, he had a falling out with his team, and he was basically left on his own in the paddock with the car and a toolbox. He had no mechanic, no truck, no nothing. But because he was such a popular guy, people rallied round and helped him, and he had help from Minister Engines, who were always big fans of his. And he went on and won the event, and it was the biggest thing at that level. And as you know, Johnny Herbert had won it the year before, and that just shows you the sort of importance that was attached to that event in those days. So once he'd won the festival, he was on his way. And in fact, even before it, he'd already signed a BMW touring car contract. So that weekend, he was well set, and it looked like he was going to make it pretty soon.
His dream was to get to Formula 1, but financially, it just didn't work out for him. So he had an opportunity to go to Japan.
I think he'd run out of options in Europe. He got the connection in Japan. He liked the idea of racing sports cars over there. He started in the sports cars. Once he'd established himself, he sort of was able to move over into Formula 3000, into Group A touring cars. In '92, he was racing in 3 championships. He was doing like probably 25 races a year, testing every week in one car or the other. And he was getting so much experience and so much knowledge. Drivers made a good living, especially someone like Eddie Irvine, who was basically the top guy at the time. He was making a few $100,000, and even Eddie was unsure about whether he wanted to go to Formula 1. He thought he would end up making less money. I mean, that proved not to be the case. But Roland's real passion was Formula One. That's where he wanted to be, and he never gave up. And he was always working away, networking, and finally he found a sponsor, and the opportunity was Simtech, and finally he was able to do it. Barbara was the one. He'd somehow met her in Monaco. She was a very wealthy lady. She was an art collector. I think she was involved in show jumping in some way. And something obviously clicked. She liked Roland. He had a lot of charm. He was always good with the ladies. She wanted to help him, and it was the perfect opportunity. And also, there was another connection. Gerhard Berger's manager had been helping Roland very quietly on and off with a few deals all the way back to Formula 3 days, and he was in the loop as well. And everything came together with Simtech.
Well, I was first introduced to Roland by a mutual friend, a guy called Burkhard Hummel, who had known Roland for many years, part of the Austrian mafia, if you like. Burkhard's main job was trying to find partners and sponsors for us, but he also knew that we were looking for a second driver who could bring some funding. Nowadays they're called pay driver, but in those days it was a new concept. And yeah, he started whispering in my ear saying, "Oh, you need to think about this guy, Roland Ratzenberger. You know, he's really good in Japanese F3000, and you really ought to meet him." And that's really how I came to meet Roland for the first time. I will always remember the first time that he came to meet us. We were in Banbury, in some offices there. It came to pass that he was going to give me a lift from Banbury back to my house in near Silverstone, and he turned up to our offices in the world's smallest hire car. It was kind of the equivalent of a Fiat 500. I don't know what it was, a Fiesta, one litre Fiesta hire car. We were going down this road at a ridiculous speed, obviously just a speed limit, maybe a little bit higher. And he was wide open in this hire car, and there's a kind of long straight which leads to a very hairy right-hand corner which falls away. And as we approached this bend, flat out in this Fiesta, I said to him, "You know, Roland, you want to watch out, there's quite a tricky corner out here." And he looked at me with what became of a very familiar look, and he basically took this corner wide open, flat out in this Fiesta. Well, any normal human being would have barrel rolled into a ditch. I thought my whole life flashed before me, and for some reason we made it by using the curb, the ditch, and all sorts of bits and pieces. It was the most amazing piece of car control. And he came out of this corner with this massive grin on his face. I was white as a sheet, but it's always stuck in my mind as, you know, an amazing experience in my life. And I did think at that moment, actually, you know, you do know a bit about how to control a car.
I didn't really know too much about him at the time. We'd obviously heard of Roland Rat, and we thought, you can't have a race driver called Ratzenberger, or Roland especially. And did a bit of investigation on the guy, and really found out he wasn't that bad. Won the Formula Ford at Brands Hatch, the championship there, and he wasn't an idiot. He was quite good. So I was pleasantly surprised. I thought, okay, we can do something with him. When I first met him, I thought, yeah, this guy's got something about him. He's got charisma. He really, really wants to be in F1, and he's good looking. And being not a sex-starved engineer, I thought maybe I can get a few spin-offs from this guy. So I thought, we're going to have a good year.
We just hit it off straight away. He was a wonderful, wonderful human being. Always had a cheeky glint in his eye. Always looked on the bright side. Always so positive. And his enthusiasm really rubbed off on all of us straight away. And you know, when he started making progress towards finding the money that was needed to secure the second seat, it wasn't difficult to think we've got to give this guy a chance.
The great thing is, you know, he got his opportunity. He never gave up. You know, it took Ayrton 3 years to get to Formula One. It took Roland 10 years. But what I like about him is, you know, he never gave up, and he fulfilled his dream.
We were a small team. We needed finance, you know, and Roland was able to bring some money to the program. We were talking to a lot of drivers at the time, and I think what made Roland stand out was he was quite experienced, although not in Formula One. He'd done quite a lot anyway, and with such a young team, with my experience having done Formula One in 1990 and sports car stuff, it made a good pairing actually for the team.
He was like a dog with two Wotsits. He was just beside himself. That's all he's ever wanted to do. And he said there was nothing that was too many problems for him. He'd say, yeah, it's okay, I'll run with this or I'll run with that. And he's just loving to be there. He was just such a lovely guy.
We actually, as a small team, we clicked really well because we were up against it, to be honest with you. We were trying to survive. We needed to work as a team, otherwise we weren't going to survive. Everyone knew that, so everybody got on well. And I think, Nick Worth, who was the boss at the time, the people he employed, I don't remember any egos in there at all. Everybody was very much part of the one family, and we all knew what we had to do and achieve.
I think he probably appreciated the fact he was back in a British team. He'd been working with the Japanese engineers for 4 or 5 years, and there was always that communication barrier to some extent. They didn't speak great English, and for him to be with people who could really understand what he wanted from the car and in debriefs and so on, I think that was a real bonus for him.
We'd done a fantastic job in securing MTV as a title sponsor. MTV at the time were kind of new, young and hip. It was before the internet and social media, and it was kind of, it really had a brilliant demographic. We were all extremely young. I was still in my 20s, the youngest sort of team principal. It just kind of fitted together well. They were fun. They sent this. They had a sort of roving reporter who was sent to do all the Grand Prix.
She was a very pretty girl, and Roland and her, we believe, met after the test, and we received a fax, as we normally do, in the morning from Roland or any driver with a breakdown of the test, and this debrief came in, and Rod and I looked at the debrief, and it didn't make any sense to us. And we thought, what's going on here? There were comments that the track was a little bit slippery, and we thought, it was dry all day, and we had no idea. It was perfectly written by Roland. Roland had wonderful command of the English language and of writing as well, and it was quite clear. And we went to see Nick and said, what's all this about? Has he gone mad? This has nothing to do with the previous test. And he said, read it properly, lads. So we read it, and it was the debrief on a night of passion he had with this girl, this television crew girl, and went, But for an Austrian to do that in perfect English, to have us over, I thought was just phenomenal. What a top guy.
There were 2 new teams that year. There was us, who nobody had heard of, and there was the Great Pacific team, run by Keith Wiggins with all of his experience, 3,000 champions, and they had, in new teams terms, the dream ticket. They had the V10 Ilmore engine, they had a car designed by Rory Byrne, they were the champion 3,000 team, so there was, Goliath and David, if you like, and the difficulty at the time was that there was only 24 slots on the grid and there were 26 cars. So basically, every single Grand Prix of that season, 2 cars were not even going to race. That was do or die, make or break, and actually, I think that the rules and the circumstances ultimately led to what happened that terrible weekend in Imola with Roland.
I think a lot of people were quite impressed with the car, the look of the car, and we did our best with team clothing that was all tank taped together and stitched together, but we did our best. It was all-nighter after all-nighter. We were absolutely knackered. We half expected we wouldn't qualify. It was going to be difficult with Roland because it was new to him, it was new to us. We'd had problems with the car. It wasn't set up correctly. It wasn't thrown together, but it would have been difficult for him to have been up there because other teams had been there for years and years and years. So it was always going to be a struggle for us.